The desert wind carried the taste of cordite and death across the Iraqi sand. Master Sergeant James Hawkeye Brennan pressed his eye against the scope of his M40A1, feeling the familiar kiss of metal against his cheekbone. February 1991, Operation Desert Storm. The war that was supposed to end in days had stretched into weeks of brutal grinding combat. Through the dancing heat shimmer, Brennan watched the ambush unfold like a nightmare in slow motion. 300 meters below his position, a coalition supply convoy burned. Black smoke twisted into the pale morning sky. Iraqi Republican Guard forces had materialized from hidden positions in the dunes, their AK-47s chattering in sustained bursts. The sound reached Brennan's ears a half-second after he saw the muzzle flashes. Physics and distance, the sniper's eternal companions. In the center of the kill zone, a young Army Ranger lay trapped behind the burning hulk of a Humvee. Staff Sergeant Wyatt Thorne, 28 years old. Bleeding from shrapnel wounds to his left shoulder and shaded thigh. Brennan had been training Thorne's unit for 3 days. The kid was good, smart, aggressive when he needed to be patient when patience saved lives. Now Thorne was dying. The rangefinder in Brennan's scope read 1,400 meters, nearly a mile. The wind gusted at 15 to 20 miles per hour, shifting direction every 10 seconds as the morning thermals rose from the sand. The temperature differential between Brennan's elevated position and the valley floor would throw off his calculations by inches. At this distance, inches meant the difference between a clean kill and complete miss. Brennan's spotter, Corporal Mike Sanderson, lay beside him with the observation scope. "Boss, that's an impossible shot. Wind's all over the place. Heat shimmers bad, and you'd be shooting downhill at extreme angle." "I know the problem, Sandy. The Republican Guard commander is using Thorne as bait. He's waiting for us to expose ourselves trying to save him." "I know that too." Brennan watched through his scope as the Iraqi commander barked orders to his men. The officer wore a distinctive red beret, 40 years old maybe, combat experienced. He'd positioned himself behind a concrete barrier, confident he was well outside the effective range of American weapons. He was wrong. Thorne tried to move, dragging himself toward better cover. Blood painted the sand behind him in a dark trail. 3 Iraqi soldiers shifted their aim toward the wounded ranger. In 15 seconds, maybe 20, they would execute him. Brennan's breathing slowed, his heart rate dropped. The world narrowed to a circle of glass, a set of crosshairs, and a target who didn't know he was already dead. The math ran through Brennan's mind like a liturgy. Bullet drop at 1,400 meters, approximately 52 inches. Wind deflection with 15-mile-per-hour crosswind, 38 inches. Coriolis effect at this latitude negligible but present. Downhill angle compensation subtracts 7% from the calculated drop. Air density, temperature, even the rotation of the Earth beneath the bullet's flight path. All of it mattered, and all of it could kill Thorne if Brennan got it wrong. He made his adjustments, dialed his scope, exhaled half a breath, and held it. The M40A1 bucked against his shoulder. The 7.62 millimeter round left the barrel at 2,550 feet per second. Flight time 3.9 seconds. For those 4 seconds, the universe held its breath. The Iraqi commander's head snapped back. The red beret tumbled through the air. The officer collapsed behind his concrete barrier like a puppet with cut strings. For a heartbeat, the Republican Guard forces froze. Their commander had been killed by an invisible enemy from an impossible distance. Confusion rippled through their ranks. Brennan didn't give them time to recover. He chambered another round. Fired. An Iraqi soldier manning a PKM machine gun fell. Another round. Another target down. The enemy forces broke, abandoning their positions, fleeing into the dunes. "Jesus Christ," Sanderson whispered. "You actually made that shot." Brennan was already moving, sliding down the ridge toward the kill zone. "Get on the radio. Tell them we need medical evacuation for Thorne. Now." By the time Brennan reached Thorne, the young ranger's face had gone pale. Blood loss. Shock setting in. Brennan applied pressure to the worst wound, packed it with gauze from his kit. Thorne's eyes struggled to focus. How did you... Don't talk. Save your strength." That was 1,400 meters, through shifting wind, downhill. Thorne coughed, his breath rattling. "That's not possible." "Wasn't easy. Teach me." Thorne gripped Brennan's arm with surprising strength. "If I survive this, teach me to shoot like that." Brennan heard the helicopter rotors in the distance. medical evacuation right on time. But he could also hear something else. More enemy forces moving through the dunes to the north. The Iraqis were regrouping. They'd be back in force within minutes. The helicopter couldn't land under fire. Someone needed to hold this position. Someone needed to make sure that Thorne got out alive. Brennan looked at the approaching dust cloud to the north. Estimated 20 to 30 enemy fighters. He had maybe 4 magazines of ammunition left. The math was simple and brutal. He removed the scope from his M40A1. The scope that had accompanied him through 3 wars, 17 years of service, more missions than he could count. He pressed it into Thorne's hands. "Listen to me carefully," Brennan said. "The hardest shot isn't the longest one. It's deciding when to pull the trigger. When to ignore the orders that'll get good men killed. When to trust your training more than someone safe behind a desk." "I don't understand." "You will. Someday you will." Brennan stood, checked his rifle. "When that day comes, remember this moment. Remember that orders mean nothing if following them means watching warriors die." The helicopter descended through the smoke rotors, beating the air into submission. Thorne grabbed Brennan's sleeve. "You're not staying. You can't stay. Those enemy forces come over that ridge, they'll shoot down the helicopter. I can't let that happen." Brennan pulled free gently. "Promise me something, son. If you ever see someone freeze while good men bleed, you teach them different. You teach them that protecting the helpless is the only order that matters. No, there has to be another way. Promise me." Thorne's eyes filled with tears. "I promise." "Good." Brennan squeezed Thorne's shoulder. "Now get on that bird and go home. Live a good life, have kids. Teach them about honor and courage. That's an order." The helicopter crew hauled Thorne aboard. The bird lifted off, banking hard to avoid potential ground fire. Brennan watched it disappear into the smoke and distance. Then he turned to face the approaching enemy. He found a good position behind the concrete barrier where the Iraqi commander had died. Good cover, clear fields of fire. He had 47 rounds of ammunition. Against 20 to 30 enemy fighters, it wouldn't be enough. But it didn't need to be enough forever. Just long enough, the first Iraqi soldiers appeared on the ridgeline. Brennan put them down with careful, measured shots. More came. He kept shooting. His breathing stayed calm, his heart rate steady. This was what he'd trained for his entire adult life. This was the moment that defined everything. When the medevac helicopter was safely away, when Thorne was beyond the range of enemy fire, Brennan allowed himself a small smile. He'd done his job, protected those who couldn't protect themselves, kept his promise to every Ranger, Marine, and soldier he'd ever trained. The Iraqi forces overwhelmed his position 11 minutes later. Master Sergeant James "Hawkeye" Brennan died holding the line, his rifle empty, his duty complete. He was 35 years old. His daughter Kira would be born 4 months later, in June 1991. His wife had been 3 months pregnant when he deployed to the Gulf. Kira would never know her father's face except through photographs, never hear his voice except through stories her mother told on quiet evenings. But she would inherit his gift, and 32 years later, that gift would save 24 lives. The Sonoran Desert in March held a different kind of heat than Iraq. Drier, sharper. The sun climbed over the Arizona mountains, painting the rocks in shades of rust and gold. Sergeant Kyra Brennan, 32 years old with a decade of Special Forces experience, had been in position on Ridge 41 for 3 hours watching. Below her elevated position, the border region stretched out in a maze of canyons and arroyos. Drug cartel territory, weapons smuggling routes. Her mission was simple: observe suspected weapons shipments, gather intelligence, do not engage. Simple, clean, safe. Kira hated it. She pressed her eye to the scope mounted on her M110 semi-automatic sniper system. The scope itself was older than she was. Her father's M40 scope, carefully adapted and mounted on modern equipment. Her mother had given it to her when Kira joined the Army at 19. "Your father carried this through 3 wars," her mother had said, turning the battered scope over in her hands. "He believed in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. He died doing exactly that." Through that scope now, Kira watched something that made her blood run cold. 50-plus armed fighters moving through the canyon system below. But these weren't typical cartel enforcers. Their movement was too disciplined, too coordinated, military training obvious in every action. They wore a mix of civilian clothes and tactical gear, carried AK pattern rifles and RPGs, moved in proper fire team formations, and they were setting up an ambush. Kira ranged the distances, marked positions in her mental map. Heavy machine gun here, RPG teams there, sniper positions on the high ground, blocking forces to cut off retreat. This was professional work. Someone with real military experience had planned this operation. She keyed her radio. Command Shadow Actual, I have eyes on 50-plus armed hostiles setting up coordinated ambush positions. Request permission to Shadow Actual Command. Say again your last transmission. Kira repeated the information, adding detail. Positions, weapon systems, estimated timing. The response came back cold and bureaucratic. Shadow Actual, maintain observation only. Do not compromise your position. Do not engage. Rangers in your sector are capable of handling their own operations. Rangers. Kira switched to the Ranger frequency, listening. Ranger Actual to Ranger Elements. Convoy is moving to Phase Line Delta. ETA to objective 15 minutes. Intelligence indicates route is clear. Maintain standard security posture. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Colton Reeves. Kira had met him once briefly at a joint operations briefing. Young, competent, the kind of officer who trusted his intelligence reports and followed procedures. He had no idea he was driving 24 men into a massacre. Kira's hands tightened on her rifle. The cartel fighters below were patient, professional. They would wait until the Rangers were in the optimal kill zone. Then they would open fire from three sides with overwhelming force. The Rangers would be pinned down in terrain that offered minimal cover. By the time they could react, half of them would be dead or wounded. She'd seen this before. 3 years ago, Afghanistan. Different mountains, same nightmare. The memory hit Kira like a physical blow. October 2020, Hindu Kush Mountains. She'd been 29 years old then, already carrying 7 years of combat experience. Her Special Forces team moving through a valley on a joint operation with Afghan commandos. Kira had been assigned Overwatch positions 600 meters away on high ground. Perfect vantage point, clear fields of fire, good cover. Her team leader, Staff Sergeant Benjamin Torres, was her best friend. 26 years old, Brooklyn accent, terrible jokes. The kind of soldier who would give you his last canteen of water without thinking twice. The ambush had come without warning. Taliban fighters with actual tactical training, not the usual poorly coordinated attacks. They'd studied the American patrol patterns, found the perfect spot, waited with professional patience. Kira had seen it all through her scope. Ben taking cover behind inadequate rocks. Private Martinez going down with a leg wound. Sergeant Kowalski trying to lay down suppression fire with his saw. She'd keyed her radio immediately. Command Shadow 7, my team is under heavy fire. Request permission to engage. I have clear shots on enemy positions. The response had been instant. Shadow 7 negative. Wait for confirmation of hostile intent. Rules of engagement require, they're shooting at my team right now, that's hostile intent. Shadow 7, maintain your position. We need to verify through proper channels. Air support is being scrambled. Hold your fire until authorized. Kira had watched through her scope as Ben tried to move to better cover. She could have taken out the machine gun nest that had him pinned. One shot, maybe two. She had the angle, the range, the skill, but orders were orders. She waited, watched, felt each second stretch into eternity. Ben took a round through the chest. She saw him go down, saw him try to crawl, saw the blood. Command Shadow 7, my team leader is hit. I can eliminate the shooters. Request permission to engage. Shadow 7, permission denied. Air support inbound in 7 minutes. Hold your position. 7 minutes. Ben bled out in 4. By the time permission came through, by the time Kira was finally allowed to do what she should have done from the beginning, 6 members of her team were dead. 6 warriors who could have been saved if someone had just let her pull the trigger. Ben's last transmission crackled through her headset, weak and fading. Kira, why won't you shoot? She hadn't had an answer then. 3 years later, lying on Ridge 41 watching another ambush unfold, she finally did. Never again. Kira watched the Ranger convoy moving closer to the kill zone. She could see the dust trail from their vehicles. 4 MARAPs moving in standard tactical spacing. Inside those armored vehicles were 24 soldiers who thought they were on a routine humanitarian escort mission. They had maybe 10 minutes before they hit the ambush trigger point. She keyed her radio to the Ranger frequency. Ranger Actual, this is Shadow Actual. You are moving into a coordinated ambush. 50 plus hostiles with heavy weapons. Break contact and redirect immediately. Static, then Reeves's voice confused and cautious. Shadow Actual, who is this? Identify yourself and your authority. 5th Special Forces Group. I have Overwatch on your route. You're heading into a kill box. Shadow Actual, my intelligence shows route clear. What's your source? My source is I'm looking at them right now through a scope. They're waiting for you. A pause. Kira could imagine Reeves processing this information, weighing an unexpected radio call against official intelligence reports. The convoy kept moving. Shadow Actual, I'm going to need to verify your identity and mission through proper channels before I... The explosion cut him off. The lead MRAP hit an IED buried in the road. The shaped charge detonated with brutal efficiency, flipping the 8-ton vehicle onto its side like a child's toy. Before the echo faded, heavy machine gun fire erupted from 3 directions. Contact, contact. We're taking fire from multiple directions. Reeves's voice tight with controlled urgency. All elements return fire and find cover. Through her scope, Kira watched the nightmare unfold. The second MRAP tried to reverse, but RPG fire forced it off the road. Rangers bailed out, taking cover behind their vehicles, behind rocks, behind anything that might stop bullets. But the terrain offered almost nothing. The ambushers had chosen their ground perfectly. Kira ranged the distance to the nearest group of fighters, 200 meters. She shifted to the next group, 180 meters. The third group, 230 meters. The M110 in her hands was rated for effective engagement out to 800 meters. Beyond that, the Army considered it a weapon system operating outside its optimal parameters. But optimal parameters were written by people who never had to watch their friends die. Kira's father had made a 400-meter shot in Desert Storm. She'd heard the story 100 times from her mother. The impossible shot that saved Wyatt Thorne's life. The shot that shouldn't have connected but did because sometimes skill and will could overcome physics and probability. She touched the old scope mounted on her rifle. Her father's scope. The one piece of him she'd ever held. In her earpiece, the Ranger frequency was chaos. Casualty reports. Calls for suppression, fire. Someone screaming for a medic. Through her scope, Kira saw a young Ranger, maybe 19 years old, dragging himself behind a boulder. His right leg ended in bloody ruin below the knee. He looked like Ben Torres. Same age, same build, same desperation in his movements. Kira keyed her command frequency. Command Shadow Actual. Rangers are under heavy fire. Mass casualty situation developing. Request immediate permission to engage hostile forces. The response came back cold and bureaucratic. Shadow Actual negative. Air support is being scrambled. ETA 20 minutes. Maintain your observation position. Do not engage. Do not compromise your hide site. 20 minutes. The young Ranger with the destroyed leg would be dead in 5. Through her scope, Kira watched an enemy sniper fire on the pinned Rangers. She saw the round impact near a Ranger taking cover behind the burning MRAP. The next shot would connect. The shot after that would kill someone else. Command Shadow Actual, they will not survive 20 minutes. I can eliminate key targets from my position. Request weapons free. Shadow Actual, that is a negative. You are not authorized to engage. Air support is inbound. Maintain your position. Acknowledge. Kira stared through her scope at the young Ranger. 19 years old, someone's son, maybe someone's brother. He was trying to tie a tourniquet on his own leg with shaking hands. The blood loss was too severe. He didn't have long. In her memory, Ben Torres's voice, Kira, why won't you shoot? She looked at her father's scope, remembered her mother's words. He believed in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Command's voice crackled through her earpiece. Shadow Actual, acknowledge orders. Do not engage. Confirm you are holding position. Kira reached up slowly, removed the command frequency earpiece, set it on the rock beside her. She kept the Ranger frequency active. Then she keyed the Ranger net, her voice calm despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Ranger Actual, this is Shadow Actual. Look east. Ridge 41. You have Guardian Overwatch. Reeves's response came back confused, strained by the gunfire in the background. Shadow Actual, identify yourself and your authority. Who authorized you to? A 32-year-old promised lieutenant. Kira settled into her rifle, feeling the familiar weight. Secure your wounded. I'm going to work. She didn't wait for a response. Through her father's scope, she found her first target, the cartel commander. Standing behind cover, confident, directing his fighters with hand signals and radio commands. He wore a tactical vest over civilian clothes. Radio antenna visible on his shoulder. 40 years old, maybe. Professional bearing. This wasn't some local enforcer. This was someone with real military training. Former Iranian Revolutionary Guard, if Kira had to guess. The tactics, the coordination, the patience, all hallmarks of IRGC training. Someone had brought outside expertise to this operation. The commander thought he was safe. Thought he was well outside the effective range of American weapons. He was wrong. Kira's breathing slowed. Her heart rate dropped. Years of training took over, pushing aside emotion, leaving only precision and mathematics. Range 210 meters. Wind 19 miles per hour, shifting southwest to west. Temperature 96 degrees Fahrenheit. Elevation differential 600 feet. Air density, humidity, the Coriolis effect, bullet drop, wind deflection, spin drift. The calculations ran through her mind in seconds. She dialed her scope, made micro adjustments, compensated for variables that most shooters never even considered. The M110 held 20 rounds in its magazine. Every shot had to count. Kira exhaled half a breath, held it. The world narrowed to a circle of glass, a set of crosshairs, and a target who didn't know he was already dead. She pressed the trigger. The 7.62 millimeter NATO round left the barrel at 2,800 feet per second. It traveled 110 meters through shifting wind, rising thermals air that was never quite still. Flight time 3.6 seconds. Through her scope, Kira watched the cartel commander's head snap back. The radio fell from his hand. He collapsed behind his cover, dead before his body hit the ground. For a heartbeat, the enemy fighters froze. Their commander had been killed by an invisible enemy from an impossible distance. Kira didn't give them time to process what had happened. She chambered another round, found her next target, an RPG gunner taking aim at the Ranger position. She compensated for wind for range for the target's movement. Fired. The gunner fell, the RPG launcher clattering on rocks. Third shot, a PKM machine gunner pouring fire into the Ranger position. He went down mid-burst. Fourth shot, the second in command trying to rally the fighters. He collapsed with a round through the chest. Fifth shot, a communications runner carrying a radio. He dropped in a spray of blood. On the Ranger frequency, Reeves' voice cut through the chaos. Who the hell? Shadow Actual, did you just... Someone who won't watch good men die waiting for permission, Lieutenant? Kira was already ranging her next target. Get your wounded to hard cover. Move them to that depression 30 meters south of your position. You have 3 minutes before these fighters adapt to the threat. She could hear the stunned silence on the other end. Then, all Rangers, you heard the Guardian, displaced to southern depression on my mark. Covering fire in 3, 2, 1, move. The Rangers responded with the discipline and speed of elite soldiers. They laid down, suppressing fire, while 4 men grabbed the worst casualties and ran for better cover. Kira provided overwatch the way her father had trained her, the way she'd trained for a decade. Every shot deliberate, every shot counted, every shot a promise kept. She'd failed Ben Torres 3 years ago, failed her team by following orders that got them killed. She would not fail these Rangers. Not today, not ever again. The sun climbed higher over the desert as Sergeant Kira Brennan settled into the rhythm of combat. Her father's scope pressed against her eye, his gift flowing through her hands. 200 meters away, 24 Rangers fought for their lives. And 1 woman, 1 rifle, 1 promise kept. She would not let them die. The Rangers reached the depression Kira had identified. Natural crater carved into the desert floor by millennia of flash floods. Rock walls on 3 sides. Good cover from the elevated ambush positions. Lieutenant Reeves and his men dropped into the protection, gratefully dragging their wounded with them. Through her scope, Kira watched them establish a defensive perimeter. Professional, fast. These were warriors who knew their craft. But they were still pinned down by superior numbers and terrain that favored the enemy. On the Ranger frequency, a voice she didn't recognize. Older, gravelly, calm despite the chaos. Ranger Actual, this is Ranger 7. Casualties are secure. Coleman's leg is bad but stable. Morrison took shrapnel to the shoulder. Patterson has concussion from the IED. Hendricks is KII. One dead already. Kira felt the familiar weight of that knowledge. One warrior who wouldn't be going home. One family that would get the visit, the folded flag, the words that could never fill the emptiness. Reeves's voice strained but controlled. Copy 7. Shadow Actual, what's our tactical situation? Kira scanned the battlefield through her scope. The cartel fighters were regrouping. Their initial shock at losing their commander was wearing off. Someone was taking charge down there. She could see a fighter moving between positions, organizing, pointing. Acting commander. Ranger Actual, you have approximately 42 hostiles remaining. They're adapting to the threat. New commander is establishing fire control. You have maybe 2 minutes before they mount a coordinated push on your position. Can you suppress them? I can eliminate key targets, but Lieutenant, I need you to understand something. I have limited ammunition and I'm engaging at extreme range. Every shot counts. I will do everything I can, but you need to be ready to fight your way out if this goes wrong. A pause, then that older voice again cutting into the frequency. Shadow Actual, this is Ranger 7, Staff Sergeant Wyatt Thorne. Question for you. Kira's breath caught. Wyatt Thorne, the name from her father's story, the ranger her father had saved in Desert Storm, the man who'd carried her father's promise for 32 years. Go ahead, Ranger 7. That shooting pattern you're using. 3-count respiratory cycle. High-low-high target sequencing. Precision over speed. That's old-school Marine Corps sniper doctrine. Where'd you learn it? Kira's hand tightened on her rifle. My father taught me. Your father have a name. Master Sergeant James Brennan. Marines, died 1991 Desert Storm. The silence on the radio stretched for 5 seconds. 10. Kira kept scanning for targets, but part of her mind was entirely focused on that silence. When Thorne spoke again, his voice was different, rougher. Jesus Christ, Hawkeye's daughter. You knew him. He saved my life with a 1/400-meter shot. February 91. I was 28 years old, bleeding out in the sand. Your father made an impossible shot, killed the enemy commander, then held the position so I could be evacuated. Thorne's voice cracked slightly. He died holding that position. Made me promise something that day. Through her scope, Kira saw enemy fighters moving. She forced herself to focus. What promise? He said if I ever saw someone hesitate while good men bled, I'd teach them different. That protecting the helpless was the only order that mattered. A pause. You're not hesitating, Sergeant Brennan. You're honoring your father's promise. Now let us get these Rangers home so I can tell you about James Brennan. Kira felt tears sting her eyes but kept them from falling. Emotion was a luxury. Right now, 24 lives depended on her maintaining perfect control. Yes, Master Sergeant, let's make him proud. She found her next target, a fighter with an RPG moving into position to hit the Ranger depression from a flanking angle. Range 195 meters. Wind still shifting, but she'd been tracking the pattern. Southwest gusts every 15 to 20 seconds, then brief calms. She waited for the calm, compensated for the range, fired. The RPG gunner dropped. The weapon clattered down the rocks, sliding out of reach. But even as that threat fell, Kira spotted something that made her blood run cold. 2 figures moving on the northern ridge, 800 meters from her position. They moved with purpose, with discipline. They carried long rifles and moved like people who knew exactly what they were doing. Counter snipers. Ranger Actual, be advised. Enemy is deploying counter sniper element to my north. 2 shooters. They're hunting me. Reeves's voice came back tight. Can you relocate? If I displace now, you lose Overwatch. Those fighters will push your position and you won't have anyone to suppress their advance. Kira tracked the enemy snipers through her scope. I'll deal with it. Shadow Actual, if you're compromised, then today is a good day to save some Rangers. The phrase came out before she could stop it. She'd heard it somewhere, read it. Rangers lead the way. Their motto, their identity. But right now, she was leading, and she'd lead them home or die trying. The first enemy sniper was settling into position. Good hide discipline. He'd chosen his spot well, rocky outcrop that provided excellent cover and clear line of sight to Kira's general area. He was moving deliberately professionally. Former military, no question. Kira ranged him. 850 meters, close enough that his rifle, probably a Dragunov SVD, would be well within effective parameters. She was still at the edge of her M110's optimal envelope. The sniper was bringing his rifle up to his shoulder. 30 seconds, maybe less, and he'd have her ranged. She didn't give him 20. Kira compensated for the distance to win the downward angle. Found the narrow window between the rocks where his upper body was exposed. Exhaled. Fired. The 7.62 millimeter round crossed 850 meters in just over a second. The enemy sniper jerked backward, the rifle falling from his hands, but his partner was already shooting. The round cracked past Kira's head so close she felt the pressure wave like a slap. Rock fragments exploded from the boulder 6 inches behind where her head had been a heartbeat earlier. Sharp stone splinters stung her neck. This wasn't suppressive fire. This was precision work. The second sniper had tracked her muzzle flash, calculated her position, and put a round within inches of her skull. Kira rolled left low and fast, came up in a new position 3 meters from where she'd been. Her heart hammered, but her hand stayed steady. Panic gets you killed. Training keeps you alive. The second enemy round impacted exactly where she'd been. Stone chips and dust erupted. If she'd stayed in position, that round would have found her. Through her scope, she scanned for the second sniper. Couldn't see him directly. He was using proper hide discipline, staying behind cover, only exposing what was absolutely necessary to make the shot. But she could see something. A faint shimmer of heat distortion from his last muzzle blast. And there a brief reflection. Something metallic catching sunlight. Brass shell casing maybe, or part of his equipment. Kira ranged the position. 880 meters, slightly elevated from her current spot. The problem was his cover. He'd positioned himself behind a large rock formation with only a narrow gap for his rifle barrel, maybe a 7-inch window. Hitting that gap from 880 meters with a moving target behind it was a nearly impossible shot. Nearly. She remembered her father's words, filtered through her mother's storytelling. The hardest shot isn't the longest one. It's deciding when to pull the trigger. Kira made her decision. She fired deliberately to the left of the sniper's position. Missed by nearly 2 feet. The round sparked off rock face, creating a bright flash. For a split second, the enemy sniper would instinctively look at the impact point. Human reaction. Impossible to completely train away. Even the best shooters had that reflex wired into their nervous system. That split second was all she needed. Kira's follow-up shot went through the narrow gap while the sniper's attention was on the spark. She didn't see the impact, but she saw the rifle barrel suddenly tilt downward, saw it slide out of position. No return fire came. 2 counter-snipers eliminated in 90 seconds. On the Ranger frequency, Thorne's voice carried a note of awe. "Shadow Actual, did you just win a counter-sniper engagement at nearly a kilometer? My father taught me never to fight fair when lives are at stake, Master Sergeant." That's exactly what Hawkeye would have said. But Kira didn't have time to appreciate the moment. Through her scope, she saw new movement in the valley. The cartel forces were bringing up something that made her stomach clench. A Toyota Hilux Technical, and mounted in the truck bed a DSHK heavy machine gun. The DSHK fired 12.7 by 108 millimeter rounds, 51 caliber equivalent. That weapon could reach Kira's position on Ridge 41 with devastating effect. More importantly, it could punch through the rocks, protecting the Rangers. The depression that had seemed like good cover would become a death trap under sustained DSHK fire. The gunner manning the weapon knew his business. He'd built up sandbag protection around the mount, creating a small firing aperture. Smart. Professional. That limited exposure made him nearly impossible to hit from Kira's angle. The DSHK swiveled toward Ridge 41, toward her position, then it opened fire. The sound of heavy machine gun fire is distinctive. Not the sharp crack of rifle rounds, but a deeper, heavier rhythm. Each round carries enormous kinetic energy. When those rounds hit rock, they don't just chip stone, they shatter it. Explosive fragmentation that turns cover into a weapon against you. Kira pressed herself flat against the ridge as the DSHK rounds tore into her position. Granite exploded. Dust and rock fragments filled the air. She felt impacts through the stone beneath her body. Each burst walked closer, the gunner adjusting fire, walking rounds toward where he thought she was hiding. She couldn't stay here. In 30 seconds, maybe less, one of those heavy rounds would find her. But if she moved, she'd lose her overwatch position. The Rangers would be exposed. Through the dust and chaos, Kira heard Reeves on the radio. "Shadow Actual, we can see the DSHK position from here." "What do you need?" Her mind raced. The gunner was protected by sandbags from frontal fire. But the technical itself, the truck mounting the weapon that was vulnerable. If she could shift the vehicle's position, change the angle, maybe create an opening. Ranger Actual put concentrated fire on the truck's front driver's side tire. "I need the vehicle to shift position." "Copy. All Rangers with line of sight target the technical's front tire. Fire on my mark." Brief pause. Mark coordinated rifle fire erupted from the Ranger position, multiple shooters focusing on a single tire. Within seconds, the tire shredded. The technical's front end sagged, pitching the entire vehicle forward at an angle. The DSHK mount was bolted through the truck bed into the frame. When the truck tilted, the weapon tilted with it. The sandbag protection that had shielded the gunner from Kira's angle suddenly shifted 15 degrees. For 3 seconds, the gunner was partially exposed through her scope. Kira fired. The gunner slumped over the weapon, his hands falling away from the grips. But before she could feel any relief, another fighter scrambled into the truck bed, shoved the dead gunner aside, grabbed the weapon controls. "Shadow Actual, you got him, but they're replacing—" "I see it." This new gunner was even more cautious than the first, keeping lower, using the sandbags effectively. Kira couldn't get an angle on him from her current position. She needed a different approach. Through her scope, she studied the DSHK itself. The weapon, the mount, the ammunition feed system. The DSHK fed from a metal ammunition box mounted on the side of the gun. That box held a belt of 51 caliber rounds. The box wasn't armored. It was just thin sheet metal designed to be lightweight and portable. If she could hit that ammunition box with enough precision, if she could penetrate the thin metal and strike the rounds inside. The math was brutal. The ammunition box measured maybe 14 inches long by 10 inches high. At 165 meters through shifting wind at a downward angle with a target that was partially obscured by the weapon itself. Textbook would call it impossible. But textbooks were written by people who'd never watched their friends die. Kira compensated for every variable she could measure and several she could only feel. Wind speed, wind direction, range, angle, temperature, air density, the rotation of the earth beneath the bullet's arc. She thought about her father making a 400-meter shot through a sandstorm. Thought about what Thorne had said, the promise, protecting the helpless. "This is for you, Dad." She fired. The round traveled for 2.8 seconds. Kira held her breath through the entire flight time, watching, waiting. The bullet punched through the thin metal of the ammunition box. For a moment, nothing happened. Kira thought she'd miscalculated, thought the round had passed through without hitting anything critical. Then the box exploded. The DSHK ammunition cooked off in a chain reaction. 51 caliber rounds detonating inside the confined space of the metal box. The explosion tore the weapon from its mount and sent the gunner flying backward out of the truck bed. The Toyota's cargo area erupted in flames. Black smoke poured into the desert air. The cartel's heaviest weapon was gone. On the Ranger frequency, someone whispered, "Holy shit." Thorne's voice followed, carrying a mixture of pride and disbelief. That was pure Hawkeye Brennan magic right there. But Kira was already scanning for the next threat. The cartel forces were in disarray now. They'd lost their commander, lost their counter-snipers, lost their heavy weapon. But they still had numbers, and numbers could overwhelm even the best defensive position if applied with enough aggression. Through her scope, she counted movement. Approximately 40 fighters remained, and they were regrouping. A new leader had taken charge. She could see him moving between the positions, gathering fighters pointing toward the Ranger Depression. He was organizing an assault, and he was doing it with tactical competence that suggested military training. "Ranger Actual, you have 12 to 14 hostiles forming up for a push on your southern perimeter. They're organizing for a coordinated assault." Reeves's voice came back strained. Shadow Actual, we're low on ammunition. If they push hard, we might not be able to hold. Kira checked her own magazine. She'd been counting. 17 rounds remaining in this magazine. One spare magazine in her vest. 37 total rounds. Against 40 enemy fighters, it wasn't enough. Not even close. But it was what she had. Ranger Actual, I need you to trust me. When I give the word, you're going to assault directly toward those gathering forces. Silence on the radio. Then Reeves, assault Shadow, they outnumber us, and they have the high ground. They also think you are pinned down, think you're defensive. The last thing they expect is an aggressive push. And Lieutenant, you won't be alone. When you move, I'll be taking out every threat that exposes itself to engage you. More silence. Kira could imagine the lieutenant weighing options. All of them bad. Stay pinned down and eventually get overrun. Try to withdraw and get cut down in the open. Or take the fight to the enemy with faith that an unknown sniper could protect them. Shadow Actual, Thorne's voice cut in. You're asking these men to charge uphill into superior numbers with their lives depending on your ability to make impossible shots. Yes, Master Sergeant. And you're confident you can do this. Kira thought about Ben Torres, about watching him die while she waited for permission, about the promise she'd made to never let it happen again. I won't miss, Master Sergeant. Tell your Rangers that. Another pause. Then Thorne, his voice carrying absolute conviction. Rangers, you heard the Guardian. She won't miss. Neither will we. Reeves came back on the net. Shadow Actual, we're trusting you with our lives here. I know. When I say move, you move. When I say stop, you stop. Understood. Understood. Rangers prepare for assault on Shadow Actual's command. Kira settled deeper into her position, controlled her breathing. Let her heart rate drop into that zone where time seemed to slow and the world narrowed to trigger, press, and target. She had 37 rounds remaining. There were 12 to 14 fighters gathering for the assault, more scattered across the battlefield. The math was tight, brutal. Every shot had to count. Through her scope, she watched the enemy forces prepare. The new commander was positioning them well. 3-man fire teams. Good spacing, they'd advance by bounds, one team covering while another moved. Professional tactics. But professional tactics assumed the defenders would be shooting back from fixed positions. They didn't account for a guardian angel on Overwatch with her father's gift flowing through her hands. Ranger Actual, on my mark. 3, 2, 1, execute. 8 Rangers erupted from the depression in a coordinated assault. They moved in bounds just like the enemy. Fire and movement, suppression and advance. It was aggressive, bold. Exactly what the enemy didn't expect. The cartel fighters reacted by popping up from their covered positions to engage the charging Rangers. Kira went to work. First shot left flank. An RPG gunner rising from cover weapon on his shoulder preparing to fire. Kira's round took him in the chest. He dropped. The RPG fell unfired. Second shot center position. PKM machine gunner bringing his weapon to bear on the advancing Rangers. Kira compensated for his movement for the win for the range. Fired. The machine gunner jerked backward, his weapon spraying bullets harmlessly into the sky. Third shot a fighter attempting to throw a grenade at the Rangers. Kira's round caught him mid-throw. The grenade fell from his hand, landed among his own fighters. The explosion took down 3 more. Fourth shot, fifth shot, sixth shot. Each round crossed more than 1,000 meters of desert air. Each round found its target with surgical precision. Kira wasn't shooting fast. She was shooting perfectly. Every trigger press, deliberate. Every shot calculated to remove the most dangerous threat. The Rangers closed the distance. 30 meters. 20. Rain began to fall. Not the gentle rain of a passing shower, but the sudden deluge of a desert monsoon. Within seconds, visibility degraded. Water droplets on Kira's scope lens. Moisture in the air affecting bullet trajectory. She wiped the scope with her sleeve, but it spotted again immediately. She was shooting through water now, every shot complicated by another layer of variables. Seventh shot a fighter in a covered position that the Rangers couldn't see. Kira ranged him through the rain, compensated for the moisture fired. He fell. Eighth shot another fighter trying to flank the Ranger advance. Ninth shot a third fighter taking aim at the Rangers from elevated ground. The Rangers were magnificent, moving with the precision and aggression of elite warriors, covering each other, firing, moving, advancing through terrain that should have been impossible to assault. And above them, invisible through the rain and distance, one woman with a rifle made it possible. 10th shot, 11th, 12th. The cartel position broke. The fighters had lost too many. Their commander, their heavy weapons, their best shooters, and now an assault they never expected supported by precision fire that seemed to come from the hand of God himself. They ran, those who could run, those who hadn't fallen to Kira's rifle or the Rangers' assault. They scattered into the desert, abandoning positions, abandoning weapons, abandoning their dead. The Rangers held their ground weapons ready, scanning for threats. But the threats were gone, fleeing, defeated. On the Ranger frequency, someone laughed, high and slightly hysterical. The sound of a man who'd been certain he was going to die and suddenly wasn't. Reeves' voice breathless. Shadow Actual, I don't even have words for what that was. Kira slumped behind her rifle, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. Adrenaline crash hitting hard. Her hands shook. Just doing my job, Lieutenant. Your job. Thorne's voice carried notes of wonder and disbelief. Sergeant Brennan, what you just did was beyond anything in any training manual I've ever read. Before Kira could respond, she heard it. Engines, big ones, coming fast. Through the rain, she saw them. 3 more Toyota Technicals. 2 troop transport trucks, all moving at high speed toward the battlefield. Reinforcements. Ranger Actual, you have enemy reinforcements inbound. North side of your position. At least 20 fresh fighters, heavily armed. ETA 4 minutes. The celebration on the Ranger frequency died instantly. Reeves, Shadow Actual, we just used most of our remaining ammunition on that assault. We can't hold against fresh forces. Kira scanned the approaching vehicles through her scope, counted personnel, assessed weapons. Her stomach sank. The Rangers had won the battle but were in no shape to fight another one immediately. Low on ammunition, exhausted, 4 wounded, and now 20 more enemy fighters with full combat loads were about to hit them. The math was impossible. Unless. Kira studied the lead vehicle through her scope. A man stood in the passenger seat of the first Technical. Tall, tactical vest over civilian clothes. He was gesturing, directing the other vehicles, coordinating their approach. Commander. The reinforcements would follow his orders. His leadership. Take out the head and the body might not know what to do. But this would be the hardest shot of the entire engagement. The vehicle was moving at 40 miles per hour across rough terrain. Bouncing, pitching. The range was 100 to 220 meters. The rain was heavy now, wind gusting unpredictably. The target was partially obscured by the vehicle's frame. Textbooks would call this shot beyond impossible. Kira had stopped believing in impossible. She removed her shooting gloves, felt the rain on her bare hands, felt the wind. Every instructor had told her to always keep gloves on. But she'd learned through experience that sometimes you needed direct contact with the rifle, needed to feel every micro vibration, every shift in conditions that equipment couldn't detect. Thunder rumbled overhead. She waited, listened, predicted the next crack. Ranged the target. 220 meters. Moving vehicle. Wind from the west at 22 miles per hour, with gusts to 28. Rain reducing visibility and affecting trajectory. Downward angle from her elevated position. She compensated for movement, led the target, calculated where he would be in 3.8 seconds when the bullet arrived. In her mind, she heard Ben Torres, "Why won't you shoot?" Heard her father filtered through her mother's voice, "Protecting the helpless is the only order that matters." Heard Thorne, "Never let anyone hesitate while good men bleed." Thunder cracked overhead, masking sound. Kira fired. The bullet crossed 220 meters of rain-soaked air in 3.8 seconds. The world held its breath. The enemy commander dropped mid-gesture. His body tumbled from the moving vehicle. The Technical swerved, nearly overturned, then skidded to a halt. The other vehicles stopped. Confusion visible even from Kira's distance. The fighters dismounted, looking around, trying to understand what had just happened. Their commander had been killed before they had even engaged, before they had fired a shot, by an enemy they couldn't see. From a distance, that shouldn't have been possible. Kira didn't give them time to organize. She fired again. The acting commander. The man trying to take charge. He fell, Another round, the fighter with the radio. Communications disrupted. Another round, the RPG team leader setting up to engage. Another round, the heavy weapons gunner positioning a PKM. 5 shots in rapid succession. Not rushed. Deliberated. Each one calculated. Each one perfectly placed. The reinforcements broke, just like the original ambush force had broken. They loaded back into their vehicles and fled, abandoning the battle, abandoning their dead commander. The rain poured down, thunder rolled across the desert, and on Ridge 41, Kira Brennan lowered her rifle. The bolt locked back. Magazine empty. She'd fired her last round taking down that machine gunner. If the enemy had known that. If they'd pressed the attack for 30 more seconds. But they didn't know. They ran. And 24 Rangers lived because of it. On the Ranger frequency, silence. Then Thorne's voice rough with emotion. Shadow Actual, your father would be so damn proud of you right now. Kira pressed her forehead against her rifle. Felt the rain on her face mixing with tears. Felt the weight of the last 4 hours crashing down on her. She disobeyed direct orders. Compromised her position. Engaged enemy forces without authorization. Every action was a court-martial offense. Her career was over. She knew that. But 24 Rangers were alive. 24 men would go home to their families because she'd chosen people over protocol. Chosen the promise over the orders. Master Sergeant Thorne, she said quietly, tell me about my father. When you get down here, Sergeant, and when you're standing in front of me, I'll tell you everything, every story I know. But first, let's get you off that ridge before someone realizes you're not where you're supposed to be. In the distance, Kiera heard helicopter rotors, Blackhawks, medical evacuation and extraction. She began the slow descent from Ridge 41. Her body protested every movement. 4 hours and 47 minutes in the same position. Combat stress draining away, now leaving only exhaustion. But she'd kept her promise. To Ben, to her father, to every warrior who'd ever trusted someone would have their back. She'd been their guardian, their angel at 200 meters, and she'd brought them all home. The Blackhawk helicopters came in low over the desert rotors, beating the rain into swirling patterns. Kira watched them descend through the clearing storm, her body finally registering the full weight of exhaustion. 4 hours and 47 minutes of sustained combat operations. Every muscle ached. Her hands trembled with adrenaline crash. The cut on her neck from rock fragments stung with each raindrop. She slung her M110 and began the final descent from Ridge 41. The rocks were slick with rain, treacherous. She moved carefully, methodically. After surviving impossible odds at 200 meters, it would be absurd to die from a fall. 20 minutes later, she approached the Ranger perimeter on foot. 2 Rangers immediately challenged her weapons raised to low ready. They saw a mud-covered figure emerging from the desert rifle, slung hands visible. Not what they expected from their guardian angel. Halt, identify yourself. Before Kira could respond, a voice cut through the rain. Strong, authoritative, aged like good whiskey. Check your fire, that's Shadow Actual. The Rangers lowered their weapons but continued staring as Kira walked past them. She was 5 feet 6 inches tall, maybe 135 pounds soaking wet. Mud covered her uniform. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Exhaustion showed in every movement. She didn't look like someone who'd just single-handedly changed the outcome of a battle. Lieutenant Colton Reeves met her at the center of the perimeter. Up close, he was younger than his voice suggested, maybe 30 years old. Sharp eyes that had seen too much combat for his age. Rain dripped from the brim of his patrol cap. Kira extended her hand. Sergeant Kira Brennan, 5th Special Forces Group attached to JSOC for reconnaissance operations. Reeves shook her hand, his grip firm, but not crushing. He held the handshake for a moment longer than necessary, as if needing the physical contact to confirm she was real. Lieutenant Colton Reeves, 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. He paused, searching for words. I'm trying to find adequate words to thank you, but they all seem insufficient. Thank you works fine, sir. You saved my entire platoon. 24 men are going home to their families because of you. Kira looked past him at the Rangers loading wounded onto the helicopters. She saw the young soldier, Garrett Ashford, the one with the destroyed leg. Medics had stabilized him. He'd live. Probably lose the leg below the knee, but he'd live. You saved yourselves, Lieutenant. I just gave you breathing room. A older man approached, 60 years old, weathered like driftwood, with a face that had seen decades of hard service. Master Sergeant rank on his rain-soaked uniform. His eyes locked onto Kara's rifle, specifically the scope mounted on top. His hand started to shake. That scope! His voice cracked. Jesus Christ, that's James's scope. Kira's throat tightened. Master Sergeant Thorne, he left it for you. The only thing he left me. She watched emotions play across the old soldier's face. I never knew him. He died on a peacekeeping mission when I was 4 months old. Thorne reached out slowly, reverently, and touched the scope. His fingers traced the worn finish, the scratches, the dents from decades of service. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with rain. He'd be so impossibly proud right now. You shoot exactly like him. Same 3-count respiratory cycle. Same high-low-high target sequencing. Same precision, same warrior heart. He reached into his cargo pocket and pulled out something wrapped in oilcloth. Carefully, with shaking hands, he unwrapped it. Another scope. Older. More worn. The original M40 scope that James Brennan had carried in Desert Storm. He gave me this the day he died. February 1991 told me to remember what matters. That orders mean nothing if following them means watching good men die. Thorne held the scope out to Kira. Today you showed me what he meant. You honored his promise, his legacy, everything he believed in. Kira took the scope with both hands, held it like the sacred relic it was. 2 scopes now, father and daughter, separated by 32 years, but connected by the same unshakable belief. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. More Rangers were gathering now, forming a loose circle. Corporal Nathan Price, his face blackened with smoke and mud. Private Luke Morrison, who'd barely escaped the exploded MRAP. Specialist Travis Davis. Sergeant Marcus Webb. All the men Kira had watched through her scope fought for protected. And Garrett Ashford insisting on standing despite his bandaged leg supported by 2 other Rangers. Thorne called them to attention. Rangers, 24 soldiers snapped to parade ground precision, even soaked and exhausted and battered. Even with 1 dead and 4 wounded, they stood as Rangers stood, proud, unbroken. This warrior saved every life here. Thorne's voice carried across the perimeter. She disobeyed direct orders to do it, risked court-martial, risked her career, risked everything. For us, for soldiers she'd never met, because that's what warriors do when orders conflict with honor. Ashford spoke up, his young voice strong despite the pain. Because of her, I called my mom an hour ago, told her I'm coming home, that I'm alive. Thorne continued. Her father, Master Sergeant James Brennan, saved my life in Desert Storm with a 400-meter shot. Made me swear I'd never let warriors hesitate while good men bled. Today his daughter honored that oath. He turned to face Kira directly. Present arms, as 124 Rangers rendered a slow salute. Not the quick acknowledgement given to officers in passing. This was the full ceremonial honor salute, slow, deliberate, the salute reserved for extraordinary acts of valor, for heroes. Kira stood frozen. She didn't know how to respond, didn't know the protocol for this. She was a sergeant. These were enlisted men and officers. The rules said they saluted officers, not fellow enlisted soldiers. But this wasn't about rules or protocol. She returned the salute, held it, felt tears streaming down her face, mixing with rain, and didn't care who saw. Thorne held his salute until Kira lowered hers. Then he called, "Order arms." The Rangers dropped their salutes but continued standing at attention. Bearing witness, remembering. Reeves stepped forward and pressed a card into Kira's hand. They're going to prosecute you for this. Command doesn't like people who disobey orders, even when disobeying saves lives. When they do, when you're standing in front of that board of inquiry, all 24 of us will testify. We'll tell them exactly what happened. You saved us. Now we save you. Kira pocketed the card. Lieutenant, you don't have to. Yes, we do, because today you reminded us what this uniform is supposed to mean. Not blind obedience, not following orders that get people killed, but protecting the person next to you, doing what's right even when it's hard. Leading the way, Thorne put a hand on Kira's shoulder. Your father taught me that 32 years ago. Today you taught these Rangers. Now get on that helicopter before command realizes you're absent without leave. The crew chief was waving from the Black Hawk. Last bird out. Everyone else already evacuated. Kira walked toward the helicopter Rangers parting to let her through. As she passed, hands reached out, touched her shoulder, her arm, silent acknowledgments. Warrior to warrior. She climbed aboard. The crew chief handed her a headset. Through the intercom, the pilot's voice, "Ma'am, we have orders to take you directly to headquarters. Command wants a word." Kira smiled without humor. Of course they did. She disobeyed direct orders, compromised her position, engaged enemy forces without authorization. She'd be facing a board of inquiry by tomorrow morning, probably a court-martial by next week. But right now, with 24 Rangers alive because she'd refused to watch them die, she couldn't bring herself to care. Some things were worth the consequences. The Black Hawk lifted off. Through the open door, Kira looked back at Ridge 41. The outcropping where she'd spent nearly 5 hours proving that one person with the right skills, the right commitment, and the right rifle could change everything. In her hands, she held both scopes, father and daughter, legacy and promise. And in her heart, she finally had peace. Fort Liberty, North Carolina. 56 hours after the engagement, Kira stood at attention in a small conference room that smelled of floor polish and old coffee. She wore her dress uniform, service ribbons on her chest, combat infantry badge, special forces tab, airborne wings. Soon she might be wearing nothing but civilian clothes in a dishonorable discharge. The board of inquiry consisted of 3 full colonels and 1 brigadier general. They sat behind a long table case file spread before them. The charges had been read. Willful disobedience of direct orders, unauthorized engagement of hostile forces, compromise of classified position and mission. Each charge carried potential prison time. Colonel Jameson Caldwell served as prosecutor. Late 40s, perfect uniform, the kind of officer who'd spent more time in the Pentagon than in combat zones. He looked at Kira with poorly concealed contempt. Sergeant Brennan, you were given explicit orders to observe and report only. Correct? Correct, sir. Correct. Yet you chose to ignore those orders, chose to compromise your position, chose to engage more than 50 hostile forces alone. Is that also correct? I chose to save 24 American soldiers, sir. Caldwell's face reddened. That wasn't your call to make orders exist for reasons. Chain of command exists for reasons. You don't get to decide which orders you follow based on your personal judgment. With respect, sir, my personal judgment was that following those orders would result in 24 dead Rangers. That's insubordination masquerading as heroism, Sergeant. Kira said nothing. What could she say? He was right from a certain perspective. She had disobeyed orders, had taken matters into her own hands. The fact that she'd been right didn't change the technical violation. Caldwell continued, you engaged at extreme range beyond your weapon system's rated capabilities. You conducted counter-sniper operations against numerically superior forces. You directed tactical movements of a Ranger element not under your command. Any one of these actions alone would be grounds for disciplinary action. Combined, they represent a complete breakdown of military discipline. I watched my team die 3 years ago following identical orders, sir. Kira's voice remained calm despite the anger building in her chest. 6 warriors bled out in Afghanistan while I waited for permission to save them. I won't repeat that mistake. So you admit you allowed personal trauma to override your military judgment? Before Kira could respond, the door opened. Lieutenant Reeves entered, followed by Master Sergeant Thorne and the rest of the Ranger element, all 23 survivors. They'd come in dress uniforms despite not being summoned. The board members looked surprised. Caldwell's looked annoyed. This is a closed inquiry. These witnesses haven't been called. Brigadier General Robert Garrison, who'd been silent until now, raised a hand. I'll allow it. These men were there. I want to hear what they have to say. He looked at Reeves. Lieutenant, you have something to add? Reeves stood at attention. Sir, without Sergeant Brennan, my entire platoon would be dead. She didn't just engage the enemy, she provided tactical guidance, suppressed counter-sniper elements, destroyed heavy weapons, and made shots I've never seen in 6 years of combat. Caldwell interrupted. Lieutenant, the question isn't whether her actions were effective. It's whether she had authority to take those actions. She had the authority of warriors dying in front of her eyes, sir. That's not how chain of command works. Thorne stepped forward. May I speak, General? Garrison nodded. Master Sergeant, you have the floor. Thorne's voice carried the weight of 40 years of service. I'm 60 years old. This was my last deployment before retirement. In February 1991, I was 28 years old, bleeding out in Iraqi desert sand. Sergeant Brennan's father, Master Sergeant James Brennan, saved my life with a 1-400-meter shot that everyone said was impossible. He paused, letting that sink in. Hawkeye Brennan made me promise something that day. He said if I ever saw someone hesitate while good men bled, I'd teach them different. That protecting the helpless was the only order that truly mattered. Thorne's voice cracked slightly. His daughter honored that promise yesterday. She possesses his gift, his courage, his soul. And because of her, I'm going home to my grandchildren instead of in a flag-draped coffin. Caldwell tried to interrupt, but Garrison silenced him with a look. Garrett Ashford was wheeled forward, his leg heavily bandaged. The kid looked even younger in his dress uniform. 19 years old, Purple Heart on his chest from this action. Permission to speak, sir. His voice shook slightly. Granted, Private. I'm 19 years old. This was my first real combat. When that IED went off when I saw my leg, I thought I was dead. Thought I'd never see my family again. Tears streamed down his face. Then I heard this voice on the radio. Calm, professional, like an angel. Every time the enemy tried to finish us, she stopped them. From over a kilometer away. He wiped his eyes roughly. I called my mother last night. Told her I'm coming home. That I'm alive. That's because Sergeant Brennan chose people over protocol. Chose us over orders. One by one the Rangers testified, each one adding to the picture. The impossible shots, the tactical guidance, the courage under fire, the complete commitment to protecting them at any cost. When they finished, the room fell silent. General Garrison stood. He was 64 years old with 3 combat tours and 4 decades of service behind him. His ribbons told the story of a warrior who'd earned his rank through blood and sacrifice. Sergeant Brennan, I served with your father, Gulf War 1991. He saved my company with an impossible shot during the ground offensive. Took out an enemy artillery spotter from 350 meters. We'd have been shelled into oblivion if not for him. Kira's breath caught. Sir, your father was the finest sniper I ever knew. More than that, he understood something that too many officers forget. That orders are tools, not sacred scriptures. That sometimes the right action conflicts with the written directive. That protecting the warriors next to you matters more than protecting yourself from criticism. Garrison looked at the other board members. This inquiry has heard testimony from 23 Rangers who would be dead if Sergeant Brennan had followed orders. We've heard about precision marksmanship at extreme range under adverse conditions. We've heard about tactical genius and moral courage. He picked up a document. This board finds that Sergeant Brennan's actions, while technically in violation of direct orders, were justified under the doctrine of troops in contact. She demonstrated exceptional tactical judgment, military skill, and moral courage. Her decision to engage likely prevented catastrophic loss of American lives. Caldwell started to object, but Garrison cut him off. This board not only declines to pursue charges, we're recommending Sergeant Brennan for the Silver Star for gallantry in action. Kira felt her knees weaken. Sir, I don't... You earned it, Sergeant. Your father would be profoundly proud. I certainly am. Garrison's voice softened. You have his gift, his courage, his understanding of what really matters. Don't ever lose that. The board was dismissed. As Kira walked out, the Rangers formed an impromptu honor corridor. She walked through them, each one standing at attention, each one bearing silent witness to what she'd done. Outside the building, Thorne waited. That could have gone worse. Could have gone better, too. Silver Star recommendation doesn't mean approval. It will be approved, trust me. He smiled. Your father and I used to talk about what kind of legacy we'd leave, what we'd be remembered for. He said he hoped his daughter would grow up to protect people who needed protecting. that she'd have the courage to do what's right even when it cost her everything. Did he really say that? Every time he showed me pictures of you, every time he talked about going home. Thorne put a hand on her shoulder. You're exactly what he hoped you'd be, Kira. Exactly what this uniform needs more of. 3 weeks later, Fort Moore, Georgia, the ceremony was held in a small auditorium filled with Rangers and Special Forces personnel. Kira stood at attention in her dress uniform, still uncomfortable with the attention. General Garrison read the citation. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of her life above and beyond the call of duty. Sergeant Kira Brennan, United States Army, distinguished herself by acts of gallantry while serving as a reconnaissance element on the 15th March 2023. When a Ranger platoon came under coordinated ambush from numerically superior forces, Sergeant Brennan made the immediate decision to engage hostile combatants despite explicit orders to maintain observation only. His voice carried through the quiet room. Over the course of a 4.7-hour engagement, Sergeant Brennan eliminated 43 enemy combatants from a range of 200 meters under adverse conditions. She suppressed counter-sniper elements, destroyed heavy weapon systems, and provided tactical guidance that enabled the successful defense and extraction of 24 American soldiers, 4 of whom were critically wounded. Her actions were directly responsible for preventing catastrophic loss of American lives. Garrison pinned the Silver Star to Kira's uniform, the third highest decoration for valor. She felt the weight of it physically and metaphorically. The auditorium erupted in sustained applause. All 23 surviving Rangers stood as one. Thorne in the front row, weathered face wet with pride. Ashford on crutches beside him, refusing his chair. After the ceremony, people mingled. Congratulations offered, hands shaken. But Kira felt disconnected from it all, as if watching from a distance. Reeves found her near the back of the room with a bottle of water. Figured you'd need this. All this talking is probably harder than the shooting was. Kira laughed. Much harder. I prefer targets that don't talk back. About that, Reeves's expression turned serious. We're standing up a new task force, Joint Operations Rangers and Special Forces working together on high-risk missions. We need shooters who can think independently, make hard calls under pressure, and have the skill to back it up. You're offering me a joke, offering you a team, people who trust each other, who'll have your back the way you had ours. He paused. People who understand that sometimes doing what's right means breaking the rules. Kira looked at the Rangers across the room, at Thorne, who was watching her with a small smile, at Ashford, who'd live because she'd chosen to pull the trigger. When do I start? Knew you'd say yes. Reeves grinned. Tomorrow, 0700 hours. Thorne approached, overhearing the conversation. Supposed to retire next month. Mandatory at 60. But if you're running shooters, I'm requesting extension as senior advisor. Someone needs to make sure you actually sleep and eat occasionally. Master Sergeant, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Your father saved my life and made me promise to teach what matters. I'm not done teaching, and you're not done learning. Kira felt something tight in her chest loosen. For 3 years, she'd carried the guilt of Ben Torres's death, the weight of not acting fast enough, not pulling the trigger when it mattered. Today, she'd been given not just forgiveness, but purpose, a team, a mission. People who understood what she understood, that orders were tools, but honor was everything. Welcome to Task Force Guardian, Reeves has said. Tomorrow we start planning our first operation. Kira smiled. Guardian, I like that. 8 months later, Arlington National Cemetery, Section 60, where the warriors from Iraq and Afghanistan lay in neat rows under the Virginia sky. Kira stood at Benjamin Torres's grave. The headstone was simple. Rank, name, dates, unit, nothing that captured who he'd been. The jokes, the loyalty, the friendship. She knelt and placed her hand on the cold marble. I didn't freeze this time, Ben. When the moment came when I had the choice between orders and action, I chose action. 24 warriors went home because of it. The wind rustled through the trees, birds sang, life continuing around the memory of death. I wish you were here. Wish I could tell you about it in person, about the shot, about Thorne, about Dad's promise that I didn't even know I was keeping. She smiled through tears. You'd probably make some terrible joke about me showing off, about how you could have made those shots with your eyes closed. She stood slowly. I'm part of something now. Task Force Guardian. We've run 4 missions in 8 months. High-risk operations, hostage rescue, strategic reconnaissance. The kind of work that matters. And every time, every single time, I remember what you taught me. Trust your training. Protect your team. Never hesitate when lives are at stake. 3 rows away, another headstone. Master Sergeant James Brennan, born 1956, died 1991. The father she'd never known except through stories and a battered scope. Kira walked to his grave and knelt again. She placed both scopes on the marble, the one he'd carried in Desert Storm, the one she'd used to save 24 Rangers. Dad, I never knew you, never heard your voice except through Mom's stories, never felt your hand on my shoulder or heard you say you were proud. But Master Sergeant Thorne has filled in the gaps, told me about Desert Storm, about the promise, about what you believed. She touched the scopes gently. He says I shoot exactly like you, same respiratory cycle, same target sequencing, same precision, says it's genetic, that the gift flows through bloodlines. I don't know if that's true, but I know this, what you taught Thorne 32 years ago, saved 24 lives last March. Your promise, your belief that protecting the helpless matters more than following bad orders. That's your legacy. That's what you left me, even though you never got to meet me. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Long shadows stretched across the grave markers. Thorne says you'd be proud. General Garrison says you'd be proud. The Rangers say you'd be proud. Kira wiped her eyes. I hope they're right. I hope wherever you are, you know that your daughter kept the promise you made, that she protected those who couldn't protect themselves, that she chose honor over orders. She stood leaving the scopes on the grave for a moment. A father's and a daughter's, separated by decades but united in purpose. I'm teaching now. Task Force Guardian brought in new recruits, young shooters who need to learn not just how to make the shot, but when to take it. I tell them about you, about the hardest decision being when to pull the trigger, about protecting people mattering more than protecting your career. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of cut grass and flowers. Somewhere in the distance, a bugler played taps for another ceremony. I'm going to keep teaching, keep protecting, keep honoring the promise. Kira picked up the scopes, cradling them carefully. Because that's what Guardians do. We don't just protect. We forge the next generation of protectors. We pass down the lessons bought with blood and sacrifice. We make sure that good men and women come home to their families. She saluted her father's grave, held it for a long moment, then lowered her hand and walked away through the rows of white headstones. 10 days later, Quantico Marine Corps Base. The rifle range at Dawn Mist still clinging to the ground. 8 new recruits stood watching as Kira demonstrated long-range precision shooting. Thorne stood beside her, playing the role of senior instructor. Gray-haired now, weathered but still sharp, still teaching. The target is 100 200 meters downrange, Kira told the recruits. Wind is gusting at 15 miles per hour from the southwest. Temperature is 62 degrees. You need to account for bullet drop wind deflection, Coriolis effect, spin drift, and about a dozen other variables most people never think about. She settled into her rifle, her father's scope pressed against her eye. But more than the math, more than the calculations, you need to know when to take the shot. Not just how, when. The recruits watched intently, young faces, eager, untested. Kira controlled her breathing. 3-count cycle. Exhaled, held. The world narrowed to crosshairs and target. She fired. Downrange 200 meters away, the target showed a perfect center hit. Again, Thorne said quietly. Kira chambered another round, settled, breathed, fired. Another perfect hit. And again, Thorne said, because mastery isn't making one impossible shot. It's making that shot every single time, in any condition, under any pressure, when lives depend on it. Kira continued firing. Each round a promise kept, each impact a lesson taught, each shot a tribute to the warriors who'd come before and the ones who'd come after. The sun rose higher, burning away the mist. The range grew warm, and Master Sergeant Kira Brennan Silverstar, recipient Task Force Guardian Instructor, daughter of legends, taught the next generation what her father had taught Thorne 32 years before. That timing matters more than distance. That courage means knowing when to act, not just how. That orders are tools, not chains. That protecting the helpless matters more than protecting your career. That sometimes the right thing and the allowed thing are not the same. And when that happens, you choose the right thing and accept the consequences. Because that's what guardians do. From 200 meters or 12 inches, distance didn't matter. What mattered was being present when it counted, being ready when the moment came, having the courage to act when others hesitated. Kira fired again. Perfect hit. Thorne smiled. Just like your father. Just like my father, Kira agreed. And somewhere in the space between memory and eternity, Master Sergeant James Hawkeye Brennan watched his daughter teach and knew that his promise had found its truest expression. Not in one moment of courage under fire, but in a lifetime of teaching others to have that same courage. Not in one impossible shot, but in thousands of shots taken by warriors he'd inspired directly or through the chain of teaching that stretched across decades. The guardian at 200 meters had become the teacher, the legacy bearer, the keeper of promises made on desert sands and mountain ridges. And she would make sure that no warrior ever hesitated while good men bled. That protection of the helpless remained the highest calling. That courage mattered more than comfort, because that was the promise, the legacy. The gift passed from father to daughter across the void of death and time, and it would live on, shot by shot, warrior by warrior, generation by generation. As long as guardians stood watch on distant ridges, looking through scopes, making the calculations, and knowing when to pull the trigger.